ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ। ਮੇਰਾ ਨਾਮ ਸੁਖਵਿੰਦਰ ਕੌਰ ਹੈ। ਅਸੀਂ ਬੈਠੇ ਆ ਸਿਮਰਜੀਤ ਕੌਰ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ Saffron Salvation ਦੇ ਲੇਖਕ ਮਨੁੱਖੀ ਅਧਿਕਾਰਾਂ ਦੇ ਸੇਵਕ ਭੈਣ ਜੀ ਸਿਮਰਜੀਤ ਕੌਰ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ Saffron Salvation ਬਾਰੇ ਤੇ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਸ ਕਿਤਾਬ ਸਿਰਫ £5.95 ਲਈ ਦੇ British Organisation of Sikh Students ਦੇ ਵੈਬਸਾਈਟ ਖਰੀਦ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ www.boss-uk.org ਅਤੇ National Sikh Youth Federation ਦਾ ਵੈਬਸਾਈਟ www.nsyf.org.uk. Simarjit Kaur has over 20 years of experience working with Shaheed families and widows in the Punjab. Speaking with you today, Benji. We've got a lot to discuss, so I hope you all have your cha pani at the ready. As you welcome kariye ji Simarjit Kaur. Vaheguru ji ka khalsa, Vaheguru ji ki fateh. Simarjit, ਅਸੀਂ ਫਿਰ ਪਹਿਲਾ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਕਰੀਏ. So, how did you begin the journey of Saffron Salvation? What happened at that time?
Well, Sukhvinder, at that time I was quite young, like yourself, and 1984 had taken place. So I think it affected a lot of people around the world. Sare Sikha de dil vich bahut dard aaya 84 to baad. And ਅਸੀਂ ਮੋਰਚਿਆਂ ਤੇ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਰਹੇ. Every Sikh did that. ਪਾਠ ਕਰਦੇ ਰਹੇ, ਜਿੰਨਾ ਵੀ ਲੋਕ ਮਦਦ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਸੀ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ. Then I came across a pamphlet, why I took to AK-47, Punjab Human Rights Organisation, and it was a very stunning image of a young Singh holding a gun. And he was a student once, and then his whole life changed because of 1984. So I was really inspired by that. And I waited a lot ke koi na koi kahani likhuga sikhandi hai na. I kept waiting ke some novelists are going to come out, and I came across Days of the Turban, a few books, but none of them were telling the Sikh story really. So that's why I started to put pen to paper and start to tell the story of Sharon and Jassa.
That's amazing. Before you went to the Punjab in 1999, was creative writing ever something you thought about? So, 1999 ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਜਾਣ ਕੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਜਾਣ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਦੀ ਰਚਨਾਤਮਕ ਲਿਖਤਾਂ ਬਾਰੇ ਕਦੀ ਸੋਚਿਆ ਸੀ?
ਨਹੀਂ, in all honesty, ਮੈਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੋਚਿਆ ਸੀ ਇਸ ਚੀਜ਼ ਬਾਰੇ, because, you know, like all good people, we have to become an engineer, doctor, we have to do something professional that will keep our families going. But I would urge all people that har ek Sikh di story bahut zaruri hai na? And a lot of people have sensitivity. ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਆਤਮਾ ਤੋਂ ਵੀ ਬਹੁਤ interesting, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ enlightenment ਆਉਂਦਾ spiritually. And ਜੇ Sikh spiritually ਲਿਖ ਸਕਦੇ, then they must, because we've had, Sukhvinder, as you know, we've had fantastic lekhaks in Sikh history, which, hai na? You had Sant Singh, he was a great intellectual. Giani Singh, Professor Puran Singh's writings. I loved reading Professor Puran Singh. So the thing is, sade apne Sikh ne vade hoye ge itihas vich, and sade guruan de time to with the only dharam, ek hi dharam hai duniya vich jinna de prophets, guru, masters ne aap ditti likh ke hai na Gurbani. So we actually come generally है ना, सारी कौम बहुत वड्डी लेखक दी कौम है. That's why it's really important कि भावें तुसी accountant हैगे, banking कर रहे, जो मर्जी वकील हैगे, fantastic वकील हैगे, पर तुसी भी fantastic कहानियां लिख सकदे. भावें fiction, non-fiction, तुसी जरूर अपनी story दसो, because that's important for the world.
It definitely is. It's a very good point that you've raised as well. So, Tanu, is novel nu kinna chal lagya si? So, how long did it take you to write Saffron?
It took quite a long time because I didn't work on it continuously. So, a lot of novelists would tell you that, Anna, that it was stop-start. So, I waited a few years. But the rewrite took about 1 year fully to do. I would say that it doesn't take very long to put pen to paper. It's something that everybody should try. Sukhvinder, there are so many both community activists, political activists, and ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਬੱਚੇ ਵੀ ਹੁਣ ਨੌਜਵਾਨ ਹੈਗੇ ਇੰਗਲਿਸ਼ ਵਿੱਚ ਫਲੂਐਂਟ ਹੈਗੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਜ਼ਰੂਰ ਹਿਸਟਰੀ ਲਿਖਣੀ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ 84 ਦੀ ਪੋਲੀਟੀਕਲ ਮੂਵਮੈਂਟ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੀ ਹੋਇਆ ਲਾਈਕ ਅਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਲਾਈਕ ਸਾਡੇ ਹੰਕਾਰ ਵਿੱਚ ਆ ਗਏ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਕਈ ਕੈਰੈਕਟਰਸ ਨਹੀਂ ਅੱਛੇ ਲੱਗੇ ਬਿਕਾਜ਼ ਜਦੋਂ ਇੰਨਾ ਵੱਡਾ ਕਲੂਕਾਰਾ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਾਰੇ ਕੌਮ ਟੁੱਟ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਹੈ ਰੀਲੀ ਟੁੱਟ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਹੈ ਭਾਵੇਂ ਜਿੰਨੀ ਵੀ ਬਰੇਵ ਕੋਈ ਵੀ ਕੌਮ ਹੋਵੇ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਦੀ ਉਹ ਟੁੱਟਣ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਹੈ ਸੋ ਉਹ ਟੁੱਟਵੀਂ ਪੀਸ ਤੋਂ ਵੀ ਕਿ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ parents witness ਕੀ ਕੀਤਾ it's so important ਹੈ ਨਾ because ਕਈ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਕੁਝ witness ਕੀਤਾ ਕਈ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੇ torture victims ਬਹੁਤ ਮਿਲੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਹੈ ਨਾ and ਉਹ ਸਾਰੀ history ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਆਲੇ ਦੁਆਲੇ ਹੈ and I would say at this point as well that ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ time ਹੈ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸੋਚ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੈ ਨਾ perhaps ਤੁਸੀਂ ਤਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੋਚਦੇ ਹੋਗੇ ਪਰ ਆਮ ਬੰਦਾ ਸੋਚੇਗਾ 84 ਬਹੁਤ late ਹੋ ਗਿਆ time ਹੁਣ ਅਸੀਂ ਕੀ ਲਿਖ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੈ ਨਾ but actual fact when you look at the Biafran movement Nigeria which in the 1960s Sukhvinder the Nigeria blockade ho gaya si from the west and Biafra di ek revolution shuru hui si and ode vich bahut lok mare gaye si Biafra de and hon to see look if you look at their ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਬਾਅਦ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਵਾਜ਼ ਕਿਦਾਂ ਆਈ ਤੀਸਰੀ ਪਨੀਰੀ ਲਿਖ ਸਕੀ ਹੈ ਨਾ so it was very painful ਪਹਿਲੀ ਪਨੀਰੀ ਕਿਹੜਾ ਲਿਖ ਸਕਦਾ ਨਾ ਪਹਿਲੀ ਪਨੀਰੀ ਤਾਂ ਮਸੀ ਬਚਦੀ ਪਈ ਦੂਜੀ ਪਨੀਰੀ ਮਸੀ ਯਾਦ ਕਰਦੀ ਪਈ but it's actually the third generation ਜਿਹੜਾ third generation Sikh ਹੈਗੇ ਉਹ ਲਿਖ ਸਕਦੇ but they have more agency to write than we did ਜਦੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਮੋਰਚਿਆਂ ਤੇ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਸੀ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਲੱਗ ਰਿਹਾ ਸੀ ਹੁਣ ਸਾਡੇ ਬੰਦੇ ਮਾਰੇ ਜਾ ਰਹੇ ਹੈਗੇ everything we did was important it was so traumatic we'd rush everything everybody would think yes leaflet which ਕੀ ਲਿਖਿਆ ਇੱਕ ਲਫ਼ਜ਼ ਵੀ ਗਲਤ ਹੋਇਆ ਤਾਂ ਲੋਕ ਉੱਥੇ ਮਾਰੇ ਜਾਣੇ ਜਾਂ ਸਾਡੇ ਬੰਦੇ ਹੋਰ torture ਥੱਲਿਆਂਗੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਹੁਣ protest ਕਰਦੇ ਹੈਗੇ it's for a insaf ਹੈ ਨਾ but they know at this minute people aren't dying so ਜਿਹੜੀ third generation ਮੈਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੀ ਹਾਂ 84 ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਹੁਣ third generation ਆ ਗਈ ਹੈ like the Biafran movement their symbol was half of a yellow sun so half of a yellow sun became a very famous novel and this lady who wrote it she was third generation Biafran and then Sari World ne recognized Galeodi writing capability and she became a professor of literature so this is an ideal time for the Sikhs to start to tell what actually happened their whole history maybe can be revised.
How can we encourage people to write more about their experiences?
That's a very good question. It's I would say that you need to just connect a lot more to your artistic side. I've been a business strategist, data analyst, so I'm not saying everybody has to like go into the arty fluffy zone but har ek banda simran vi karda right especially if they're watching Sangat TV then they do simran at some level they have an interest in the pant and jeri Gurbani hai and the pant they're two very very interesting areas jere dono they merge into your life and then you can still be an individual you can still have your own beliefs so the main thing is to not get discouraged a lot of artists they get very discouraged and I think we've not really brought a lot of the word art is not understood by Sikhs and yet art is one of the most powerful things in the world why do people pay 3 million pounds for a painting I was studying some black painters and I was really surprised because I'm not very artistic but I was really surprised that this painting went for 3 million pounds because art has a value science has a value but jira art the value it's to give human emotion why do people love watching films why do they love singing a song or hearing music and jere sare guru sige ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕੀਰਤਨ ਵੀ ਇਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਜੋੜ ਲਿਆ with music because they understood the power of art the power is extremely powerful revolutions are created on art I talked to a few people who were part of the resistance movement of Khalistan back in Punjab and they had read Victor Hugo's Les Miserables and they'd been inspired by the French Revolution. So art is very, very powerful.
I 100% agree with you. I think you've made some very valid points that is still relevant to everybody today watching, regardless of what age they are. So back in 1999 as well, you were mentioning that you went to Punjab for a personal reason as well. Could you just tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, in 1999, my mother passed away. So we just thought it was important, and it was also the 300th, I think, anniversary of the Khalsa. It was a very big centenary in that year. So we just felt it was important to go back to the Punjab, and we took my mum's ashes. But then my father, who had Joginder Singh, he had always been a big activist in the 1960s in England. So he was one of the first Sikh leaders in the UK, and he set up shit. It encouraged me, and he said, "Why don't you print your book?" Now, I actually really personally feel that at that time I was quite annoyed with my dad, and I thought, "Oh my goodness, we've come here to take my mother's ashes, and he's telling me print a book." But I understand what he was trying to do, you know, as a father, because anybody who survives someone else dying, what they're trying to do is give direction to that person. So he was giving me direction to put my energy into something else. And the book was printed independently, very bravely, by the spokesman, I think they're called at that time. It was very hard. I don't think people can understand. In 1999, that was like 4 years after the war had ended. It was a very hard time to bring out a voice regarding the Sikh genocide. It was extremely hard. So we had people who backed it, you know, and commented on the book, and we brought it out. And then I also started to travel with the Committee for Disappearances Punjab, CCDP, and then they were also sari jathebandiyan na ikkathiyan ho gayian si, Sukhvinder. So after the war ended in 95, sort of 94, 95, all the Sikh Jathebandiyan came together, the human rights people in Professor Gurtej Singh's house. So they literally formed the CCDP, Committee for Disappearances Punjab, and they wanted to know once and for all how many people had died in the Punjab during the war. And so a lot of people went right across Punjab to do field work, and I went with them. And that's when I first started to see the Shaheed Pariwars.
Wow. You spent quite a lot of your personal life as well. Like you mentioned, helping the Shaheed Pariwars, widows, nearly 30 years. What was that like to experience, Benji?
I think it was one of the biggest privileges of my life, if I have to be honest. I think sometimes I know banda sochda ki assi aap decisions koi lande hege na, but it's actually hukum hunda, Paramatma da hukum bahut vich aanda. You know, to see aap jinna marji soche assi aa kita, but you know, that's how a human being's trying to tell a story, but that's not actually how it happens. So in a way, if my mother hadn't passed away, I would probably not have got linked as much to the Punjab at that point, maybe. And so the more I saw Shaheed Pariwars, the more I was so inspired by them. They were so brave. Some of these people had gone through terrifying times, terrifying torture, tashaddud. Fir vi thanu o jehdi Sikhan di Jameer disi hai na. When I was back in England, I had a really high-flying job, and I was traveling business class across to America. I can't tell you that even that meant nothing. When you met people like this, you just thought, oh my God, I can't leave these people. So the more I went back, the more I couldn't leave them. So I just tried to use whatever earnings I had, 90% of my earnings, and, you know, nearly went to 100% and went into debt. But I couldn't leave those people because they were so interesting, and I didn't want to just study them. I wanted to actually help them, you know, with medicines and things. At that time as well, Sukhvinder Banji, I couldn't find doctors who would help. So the problem that people faced, both activists ne seva kiti, you know, for Shaheed Pariwars individually kiti, gupt hoke, was the problem was that India didn't open up a humanitarian route into India. So you were always under suspicion. So we decided medicines were best, and food, and we couldn't bring money in easily. And at that time, I remember asking Dr. Neelam in Barusab that I've got no doctors. And there was a human rights lawyer, Ashok Agarwal. He said as well, he said, you will never find a doctor who's going to do seva for free because it's so commercial, you know?
Yeah.
So you're also not going to find doctors who want to do free work on families that, you know, the state is still scrutinizing and monitoring so badly. So, and yet Dr. Neelam, she put me in touch with lots of doctors like Dr. GP Singh, Tajinder Singh, who were volunteers for Barusab. So you see, ਕਿਸੇ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਹੋਰ ਵੱਡੇ ਸੇਵਾਦਾਰ ਹੈਗੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਵੀ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਇੰਨੀ ਮਦਦ ਮਿਲ ਜਾਂਦੀ, and then you get the nods and the help. And you know, Maharaj di Kirpa naal, you got to see a lot more Shaheed Parvaras. But it's I would say to people even now, they can see a lot of both darshan ho sakda Shaheed Parvaran de, and they're so brave. They're really brave people.
How did you find the Parvata?
Primarily through the Committee for Disappearances Punjab, through Narayan Singh. Narayan Singh was very well known in that area. So a lot of Parvars, Shaheed Hoisi, that was around Gurdaspur, Amritsar, Taran. So a lot of people knew Narayan Singh, and later his sons have carried on work as well through the Punjab disappearance groups. So Jagjit Singh, Baljinder Singh, they've done a lot of work for PDAP. So the networks were all there, but unfortunately, because of the impunity there, the state has always made it very hard that, you know, you can't just set up a base and put a flag up and say to everybody, come here. So impunity does that because the country has never recognized what it's done. So that's been half the problem.
Sounds like quite a lot you've experienced out there as well. Being a British-born citizen yourself, like you've already touched on, you've seen the contrast from the Western world. How can we further support our communities in the Punjab?
In the Punjab right now, I would say there's a lot of people to support. There's probably about 5,000 Shaheed Parvars just in the Punjab disappearance cases alone, who are falling into huge debt. They're below the poverty line before COVID started. And we can help them, you know, whether it's psychologically, we can make connections between youngsters here and ਜਿਹੜੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਦੇ ਹੁਣ somebody ਜਿਹਦੇ father ਸਾਰੀ ਜ਼ਿੰਦਗੀ he died, and then mother we torture hoy, family we harass hoy from the police. They need a lot of psychological support, but they're falling into debt on a big level. And then if I give you one example, that came from the PDAP, Punjab disappearance cases, was that ਉੱਥੇ families are being very because of case pare hege against the Indian government and they want justice, ਉਹ ਬਹੁਤ ਗਰੀਬ ਹਨ. And yet ਜਿਹੜੀ prosecution ਹੈ ਉਹ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ bribe ਕਰਕੇ ਪੈਸੇ ਦੇ ਕੇ ਚੁੱਪ ਕਰਨਾ.
Oh, wow.
And I am telling you, I've met so many amazing people who they're so brave that they're up against that, then they're up against mafias, then they're up against even the odd mafia local baba type of person, dera type. And even they're putting pressure on them that stop your cases against the police. And still, even all Garib innihan, but all fairly onadi Jameer innihan, they don't want to. They said, Asi justice chande, ki what tusi such the so what you did to our family members. So I think Odda de Parvara nu vi both seva ho sakdi sangat to. Food to, debt to, and वैसे भी मिल सकते लोग.
I think the grassroots reality of how many Shaheed families are suffering as well. You mentioned the poverty line. Is it something like 5,000 out of 8,000 that are below the poverty line already currently? And that doesn't even include torture victims.
That doesn't include torture victims. In the whole 30, 40 years, no Jathebandi has managed to ever figure out how many people have actually physically been tortured. Some torture victims have been fine. They've moved on. They've got themselves a job. And the other problem is you've got commercial NGOs who've done good work around the world. But the problem is they've only picked up 100, 200 cases in the Punjab. So you have a mata will come to you. They'll say, ਕਿ ਉਹ ਫਲਾਣਾ ਗਰੁੱਪ ਇੰਨਾ ਮਾਤਾਵਾਂ ਦੀ ਹੈਲਪ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਮੇਰੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਨਾ ਹੁਣ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਸੀਗੇ so I was put into really difficult situations ਜਿੱਥੇ ਹੁਣ ਕਿਸੇ ਦਾ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਹੋਇਆ and ਉਹ ਕੋਈ ਘੱਟ ਤਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਹੋਇਆ you know he's not less a person his sacrifice to other people who are being helped so it's been very very random Hannah and different groups have got their own projects but ਇਹਦਾ ਮਤਲਬ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਹਰ ਇੱਕ ਦੀ ਹੈਲਪ ਹੋ ਚੁੱਕੀ ਹੈ ਨਾ and there's some people ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੇ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ famous ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਏ so ਉਹ ਵੀ ਬਹੁਤ big problem ਹੈ because ਉਹ famous ਨਹੀਂ ਕਦੀ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਹੋਇਆ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ famous ਪਰਿਵਾਰ ਸੀ ਚਲੋ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਵੱਲ ਧਿਆਨ ਚਲੇ ਗਿਆ ਸੰਗਤ ਦਾ but ਇਹਨਾਂ ਵੱਲ ਤਾਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਦਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਗਿਆ that doesn't mean ਉਹ ਵਿਚਾਰਾ ਉਹ 40 ਸਾਲ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਵੀ ਗਰੀਬ ਸੀਗੇ ਹੁਣ ਵੀ ਗਰੀਬ ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਵੀ ਔਖੇ ਹਨ ਹੈ ਨਾ and ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਕੋਈ sacrifice ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ
So, ਸਾਨੂੰ ਬਹੁਤ ਮਾਣ ਫਕਰ ਮਹਿਸੂਸ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਅਸੀਂ 1984 ਬਾਰੇ ਪਹਿਲੀ ਅੰਗਰੇਜ਼ੀ ਨੋਵਲ ਦੇ ਲੇਖਕ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਅੱਜ ਬੈਠੇ ਆ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਖਿਆਲਾਂ ਦੇ ਮੁਤਾਬਕ ਆਮ ਜਨਤਾ ਕਿੰਨਾ ਕੁ 1984 ਬਾਰੇ ਜਾਣਦੇ ਆ so do you think people understand 84 as much as they should?
I think people have feelings about 1984, but there is a lot of people ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਮਝ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ, especially ਜਿਹੜੇ non-Sikhs ਹੈਗੇ, ਜੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਤੁਸੀਂ 1984 ਕਹੋ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ they don't even understand. They just think George Orwell and the novel on sort of dictatorship and surveillance, है ना? So my ideal is that this novel है ना लोग आप भी खरीदन but खरीद के अपने Western friends तक भी पहुंचावन है ना because I don't think the world has understood what happened to the Sikhs and also if what I found was in writing this book which I'm encouraging other people to write I'm not saying that this is the best novel on 84 because I feel the best novel is still to come and it will be published and I think we've had talks before Sukhvinder on this a lot of Sikhs feel that asi publish honani right because there's this whole agenda that won't pick it up it's actually bahut hai publish hona by anybody right but there was a literary agent who looked at this novel and she was very interested that's why the rewrite took place she didn't take the novel in the end but she loved the characters and she couldn't believe as a white outsider she couldn't believe that 84 which did this really happen so I think and I didn't have the talent to rise to her challenge so I think if the Sikhs je tusi likh sakde try karo likhna and bring out beautiful translations of Punjabi novels as well because there's no reason why the West won't produce a great film or a great book that's written well from a Sikh point of view there's no reason it's just not been tried attempted so it can be done sorry I'm just rambling on
no it's all making sense I mean you mentioned about the first edition and obviously this is the latest edition but even people who have read the first edition in 1999 they still are so excited to read this latest edition and what I really loved about the novel itself is how you mentioned you did bring in Punjabi words and you weren't scared to use them as well you used words like gidda bulli parmatma darshan the pink palla and that's something that we should really it's our maa boli we should really keep this alive and I know that tusi Cambodia de vich as well you did a conference about artistic resistance as well how did you even get into that kind of conference?
That's a very good question. I'm actually not an academic like that, even though I studied technology at a master's level. But what I was surprised was that the novel, this was a very academic conference on genocide around the world. So you had a lot of professors and onane kafi, they've produced books, conferences on studying genocide. But they found the fact that had written a novel interesting and they said that you can come to discuss 1984 and the Sikh genocide. So my paper in Cambodia was about artistic resistance because I think ਜਿਹੜੇ Sikh ਹੈਗੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ artistic ਸੰਘਰਸ਼ ਵੀ ਕੀਤਾ I think Sangarsh is the right word, but forgive me, he hasn't gone to the level it should. So actually artistic Sangarsh vi kita. So if you look at it, how did Sikhs keep alive the history? Dadis were really key. So Dadis would start to tell us what was going on in Harmandir Sahib, or they'd tell us what was going on afterwards. And all the Shaheedan bare daste sige. Then you have had recently the songs that have come out on YouTube. Then you've had Bhangra songs mixed with Panthak, and Jagowale were very big daddies. And Jagowale's history kept alive the history. But you also had, interestingly, if you look at UK which Awazi Qaum, Des Perdes, you had Punjabi newspapers that kept trying to tell you what was going on back in the Punjab. And that this is how the common banda Maria Jariasi. You weren't getting that from the Guardian newspaper, with all due respect, or from the BBC, because the BBC had stopped reporting. It wasn't news anymore for them.
Yeah.
But news stuff Oriasi over a 10-year period of civil war. So I looked at how artistic resistance, and especially the Najwan now, they've gone into creating more and more music. So you've got various labels like Revolution Records, you have interesting songs from Mahoon Singh. So you actually have a whole new generation that are trying to bring in artistically the history of what's actually happened to the Sikhs, as well as create understanding. So it's not just about history. As you know, Sukhwinder, the best history is not about history. History which ki hunda, you don't just go back to the past, you also learn for a future. If the Sikhs were ever persecuted again, they should realize what actually happened and how they can counteract that narrative. So, and actually, struggle to survive. So, yeah, that was what the paper was about. But I also found that interesting in Cambodia, which 2 crore banda marya gaya si 2 salan de andar. So, what I learned in Cambodia itself was that, again, art is so powerful. There's a book called Memoirs of My Father, and it's about a young girl and or kirtan, or a young boy, and what they hear about the Kalugara. And now it's being made into a film by Angelina Jolie, or has been made. So I got a lot of encouragement from that conference that a jiri novel how any powerful ho sakdi hai ki akhan khul jandiyan na duniya di nu.
100%. You mentioned art and how important that is, especially in our community. There are already various Indian novelists. How comes they haven't written about 1984? I don't understand why it's taken so long for a novel to be released.
It's a question, to be honest, really. The famous novelist at the moment, and I think BBC, WIC, A Suitable Boy, is Vikram Seth. Every novelist writes from their own viewpoint. So if their viewpoint doesn't cover, like I was really surprised that the novel, it's a beautiful novel apparently. I've read his other one about music, but I was just shocked. It's set 3 years after partition. When genocide in Punjab, it was so traumatic that the people of Punjab were in a disaster zone, but he set it somewhere else, and there's different characters, and it's about somebody who's trying to get married, which is interesting in itself. Arundhati Roy as well, she's become a very big vocalist, and she's a big novelist. But I think that's where the power of art is this, that if it happens to you, and you happen to feel strongly, you can use that art in a very talented way. And I do believe, I hope, the whole point of bringing Saffron out isn't, it's not a bit of an ego challenge for us. I'm not interested in that much in the art as I am in helping Shaheed Parvars. But I do feel that that the powerful writers and the artists are out there, and as long as they feel they're not in a vacuum, they should be encouraged to write, that they can be published mainstream and not have to do it independently like us.
I think a key point that you said as well about supporting everybody, especially our own Sikh, and I think what's really nice is the fact that you are getting this book out through platforms such as the British Organisation of Sikh Students, National Sikh Youth Federation, and also Naujawani as well. They're starting a book club soon, and it's just really nice to see that sense of community as opposed to just kind of being that generic novel just on Amazon. And that's really quite powerful as well, the way that you kind of launched this final edition.
Very kind of those platforms to support us, and Naujawani, if I can say especially, that was so nice that they actually made the first book they've ever done in a book club, because Harvinder has always been, trying to advocate. I would advise everybody, join karo naujawani.com, and काफी Sikh books nu cover karde hege, and they encourage people to read, and at least he gives you a summary of that book so that you have an idea that I must read that at some point. And so it's really nice that they made Saffron Salvation part of their book club. I would encourage people, to read as much as you can at time, and especially COVID lockdown, which is a good time to read because people are in lockdown, and there's no reason why we can't read all the great classics that, the writings of Sant Teja Singh. There's no reason why we can't go back into history and start to read what our history is and what happened to Sikhs of early years, as well as now, as well as the future. So, and maybe people can write as well.
Do you have any advice for any inspiring authors that are listening right now?
I would honestly encourage them to reach out to us as much as possible and to use this time creatively, because this is a very difficult time. The world is in lockdown on various issues. This is an excellent time actually for creativity on another level. So hamesha lokan nu hunda si ke assi kam te ja rahe, assi busy hage, sade kol time nahi hai. But if you look around you, your community is all there. The history of the Sikh history of the 84 movement, the Khalistan history, it's all around us right now. And you can aspire to write down people's stories. What did they see? What happened? And if not, you can write from your imagination as well. Because what the fascists want in the world is denial. If we are part of the narrative of denial, Hannah, and if we asivi puljiye, then we haven't done any service to all those poor people who suffered in those 10 years. So there's a lot we can do. And I would encourage everybody, Hannah, to see Jinnah likh sakde, roj likhya karo. It's also a dharmic level, Devi. It helps you meditate. It helps you relax. So, first, a good method that I use is that you do 2 pages of journaling every day. So every day, to see diary likho, Hannah. Maybe you write, I need to get the shopping in and COVID is getting on my nerves. It could be 2 pages of rubbish. Once you go past the 2 pages of rubbish, you'll be very surprised. Then you go into spiritual realm and you actually become creative. So even if you're a lawyer or a banking person, or you're holding down a job in, I don't know, in some supermarket, you'll be very surprised that the journaling, diary likhna, releases creativity on another level. And also, thada aap bhi hai na bhakti ho jandi hai, and it's a good relaxation method for if you're feeling stressed as well.
That's amazing. I'm kind of making notes as well as we're going. I'm going to start doing this as well. Can we expect more novels from you in the future then, Simarjit Kaur?
Basically, I've written several novels. So my next novel is Deepa's Wedding. And it was a story that I'd spent quite a few years thinking about. But during lockdown was the time I really got pen to paper and started to write. And I'm hoping that, the viewers will support that book as well. And I'm also trying to write the life of a shaheed, but that's quite hard because I think it's quite hard because people were very brave, and you have to, in order to go into that space, you have to think about their bravery. So it's actually a very, very different space for me. And then I've had to look at what is a shaheed in general, and what is it spiritually, a person like that. So ਕੋਈ ਵੀ ਹੈ ਨਾ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਵੀ theme ਤੇ ਕੋਈ ਲਿਖਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ ਜਾਂ ਪੜ੍ਹਨਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ, it's worth meditating. I think a lot of historical novelists, they spend years researching and spiritually thinking about their subject. And that's not to say that only the Sikhs can write the novels about the Sikhs, because I think non-Sikhs could do it just as well. But the problem with the novel is that the subject has to come to you. It's got to be a subject of interest and passion for you. So maybe people could write about bereavement, they could be writing about divorce, they could be writing about any of the human elements, finding love in the world, how to make it in the world. And it could be a lot of levels, but it would be nice if Sikhs were trying to, connect more creatively. So, and also we're hoping to bring out some memoirs of a couple of widows as well, because I think it's very important that the activists in Punjab, that their voice should be able to come out.
I think there's really good points, and I love the fact that you are encouraging people, regardless. This is a novel written by yourself. You mentioned earlier this isn't kind of an ego trip. It's more so a cry to all Sikh artists, regardless of their level, to get involved. Let's talk about, our memoirs between the years 1984 to 1994. Let's continue to write, because like you mentioned, when you went to Cambodia, the artistic resistance, we need to keep that alive, and that's really empowering. I resonate quite a lot with what you're saying.
Thank you, that's really kind of you. And even now, even people who are young now and born after 84, like the post 84-94 period, like some of the short stories I've tried to write, I haven't brought them out yet, but it's again the thing of, where are the marketeers for the Sikhs, who can back books, who can push things through, because there's no reason why Sikh documentaries and Sikh films can't be on Netflix. But I found that some of the stories that I was trying to write, they were from the viewpoint of somebody who's 20 now, and they're looking back at that, and then they're looking forward at what they want to do. So they're like, so yeah, your viewpoint doesn't have to just be in 84 itself. It might be now, and what the world is like now, and then there could be a very interesting novel, not that I've written it, but somebody could write it, but it could be about if 84 hadn't taken place and the narrative starts to shift. Can you imagine? So I actually did imagine that you didn't have 40,000 people killed, all this torture, and where would the Sikhs have been now if 84 hadn't taken place, you see? And so you see, there's so many different stories that can come out. And hopefully, if people have even read or studied the history, they can write beautiful stories, even on something that is not even related. But yesterday, Sukhvinder, I was watching, I don't know how much time we've got on the interview, but yesterday I was watching a lovely a film, The Book Thief. So I don't know if you came across it, but The Book Thief was a beautiful book. I was so immersed in the book, I didn't even know about this film that had come out. And the film, they've done real justice to it. But if people are still writing about the Jewish genocide, and that was 50 years ago, or the silence of communists in Nazi dictatorship Germany, then stories are very, very powerful. So it doesn't have to be that that this is 30, 40 years on. I think the problem with the Sikhs sometimes, and the Punjabis, I've always had Punjabis saying, but nobody reads. But I mean, in a way, it doesn't matter if you don't read or nobody who reads, whether it's the Punjabi thinking or just a joke, but the whole world reads, as we know.
Exactly.
And we know that, if it wasn't for lockdown, we know that people would be on an aeroplane going on holiday to wherever to put their feet up on the beach. And it could be, Bill Gates's wife is going to read a novel. I was quite surprised. There was a really famous novel years ago, The Far Pavilions, and somebody said, "How did it become made? How was it made into a film?" And literally, a film director's wife was reading it as a holiday read on the beach.
Oh,
So
wow.
even if you think, well, I mean, the 10 people I'm hanging around don't read a novel or they don't read a book, that's not the case, as we know from the hundreds of years of history and, Shakespeare, and we know the world reads. Now, when they read and what they read is another matter, but there's no reason why the Sikhs can't have agency to create their own powerful art. And sorry, one of the areas I also started to look at with artistic resistance was also the amazing paintings. I couldn't believe in 1984 that there was so much media blackout, and yet we suddenly started to see paintings of Bindranwale, of the Akal Takht destroyed. Those artists, I don't know who they were, but I saw the paintings in the Gurdwaras at that time, 30 years ago. So they created a huge visual memory. And again, somebody could just start to do research on this, whether even if you're not a creative writer, you could start to write some strong nonfiction and start to catalogue how people started to create a voice when the voice was being suppressed on a very brutal level, as well as people being killed in the Punjab.
Again, some very excellent points. Everything that you're saying, I'm just getting immersed in. It all makes sense, and it's definitely something we can all, connect with. And I find it extremely amazing to hear. This novel itself, it will always spark a talking point, even like you mentioned, is anybody Sikhs can pick this up and just start talking about it. How amazing would that be, that we can finally just talk so openly to everybody, and nobody will then question, oh, what did actually happen to Sikhs in 1984? And I thank you.
Not to interrupt you, but I think that's one of the important things, is we have agency to talk about our own stories and honestly talk about them. We're always seeking that the West has got to somehow acknowledge, we have to prove to the West. I mean, there were thousands of Sikhs were tortured. What is there to prove? The doctors like Dr. Vincent Iacopino, Physicians for Human Rights USA, they actually documented the torture. So, I mean, I'm quite tired as a novelist, even, that we have to keep chasing on this evidence trail to prove to the West, because I feel that also artistically we should create our own voices. A lot of the great Karkus like Anok Singh Babbar, they were poets. A lot of the people involved in 84 and after, and this whole movement, were actually writers. There were artists and there were poets. And if you can imagine that they're trying to fight a war and they're poets. So I don't understand why that side of it, here in the West, we're not, pushing forward. And we tend to sort of forget that. And then the other thing is, there's such interesting writers like Narayan Singh, who wrote Khalistan Da Banda. And so the Odyssey of Khalistan is going to come out hopefully next year. But there's amazing voices. And what we do need is also fantastic translators, Punjabi to English. Orhan Pamuk is a Turkish writer. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature. How many people in the world read Turkish? It's because his translations have been done to such a high level into English, and he is a great writer, that the world can pick it up and suddenly go, oh, that's amazing. And our translations really fall flat, with all due respect. I like the fact that people try to bring out something in Punjabi to English, but the translation level starts to get very, mechanical and robotic. And what people don't realize is if we could translate to that level, whether you're in little hubs of translators and you've got the Punjabi and the English and, everything going and you're working on it, it needs to be done to a high level, because a language has to be so easy to read in the other language. If it's not, and it's technically correct, and that's been done a lot with Gurbani as well, with all due respect, if it's just technically correct but nobody understands what you just said, it doesn't matter then. It hasn't been translated correctly. It has to be done in such a way that, you literally can read that and not have to read the original. that is the level it needs to be done. And it's not being done really in Punjabi novels. And Bibi Sandeep Kaur's work as well on her book novels on Khalistan haven't been done. So that will be fantastic as well if that can come out. A lot of the voices out of the Punjab, they need to come out. They've been preserved beautifully, you know, in newspapers like I've told you, Al-Bazikom and Des Bades and everybody trying to do serializations. But they need to come out on a different level. And then maybe that's a project that people can do as well in the West. That would be good.
Hopefully we can have another interview with you and see how things have progressed since this one. But it's been amazing speaking with you, Simarjit Kaur. बहुत धन्यवाद है ਤੁਹਾਡਾ. It's been really insightful just hearing your thoughts. If you haven't already purchased this novel already, you can do via the BOSS website, also the NSYF website as well. Like we've mentioned as well, through talking, Nojavani is also running a book club. Please make sure that you subscribe, you join the member club as well. The book club will be beginning the 1st of November as well, where you can, you know, have that little hub, discuss the novel as well. And if you've got any thoughts at all, you can definitely share them via Twitter for Saffron Salvation, which is at official Saffron, and you can also follow on Instagram as well, so saffron_salvation. And is a benti hath jod ke benti kar diya. Please make sure that you support Sikh artists. Make sure you buy lots and lots of copies. Share them out to everybody, not just Sikhs but your friends. And Simarjit Kaur has also said, you know, this is the time to be reading, and let's learn and grow as a community, and hopefully we can see more interviews with more beautiful Sikh artists. So thank you very much, Simarjit Kaur, and I just wanted to say goodbye. So Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.